Well, hello, hello. Happy Thanksgiving, and welcome to another episode of Blue Family Unity. I'm your host, Elsa Kurt.
Coming together to share our lives, standing on the thin blue line, giving you some peace of mind on the Blue Family Unity Show.
If you're part of the law enforcement family, this is your show. Here we talk about all things Leo family life, the good, the bad, the funny, and the sad, and everything in between.
On the Blue Family Unity Show.
Today's episode is going to be a series of highlights of my favorite interviews thus far. The reason for that is I'm in Florida right now holding my granddaughter. I know it doesn't seem that way because I'm sitting here talking to you, but obviously this is a pre-recorded episode and I am probably right at this very moment in absolute grandmother heaven. Yes, and this is the point where you're supposed to say, "Oh my God, you're a grandmother? No way." I thank you in advance for saying that. And if you didn't, well, I guess I'll never know. Listen, I hope you are having an absolutely fabulous day with family and friends and loved ones. And I know I am enjoying my day immensely. I look forward to seeing you guys again next week. But in the meantime, here's some highlights of my favorite interviews. We have Congresswoman Kat Kamik. Hey family, this is for those of you new to the law enforcement family or just looking for some relatable content. My book, Welcome to the Family, Life Behind the Thin Blue Line, is available on Amazon and through my website, elsakurt.com, and most major online retailers. This is a must-read survival guide for significant others new to the law enforcement family. When you become a police spouse or a significant other, you enter a world most can't imagine. The contrast can be jarring and often scary, especially in today's society. This book helps those new to the lifestyle navigate the myriad of challenges faced by LEO partners, but also shares the many joys of living life behind the thin blue line. Inside this book, you'll discover the ups, the downs, the normal and not so normal, coping strategies, tips for fostering strong and healthy relationships, and even the humorous side of law enforcement family life. First off, congratulations on being the third youngest Republican woman elected to Congress in this election cycle. That is pretty darn cool.
Yeah. No, it's pretty cool. It's an honor to represent young women everywhere, but also, being the youngest Republican woman in the country today and the third youngest ever in history. It's pretty wild.
Yes, this is huge. I think this is so powerful and impactful for young women out there right now wanting to get involved in politics. I have to admit, politics intimidates me. The very idea of it is intimidating to me. So to watch someone like you do this so masterfully and with, grace and strength, it is really, really inspiring. So I think you're going to spark a lot of passion in a lot of young Republican women and maybe some of us older ones too.
No, I appreciate you saying that, but heck, what you're doing right now, you're hosting a podcast. You're a much better speaker than many members of Congress already. So don't ever be intimidated by politics. And, I tell people all the time, even if you feel like it isn't something that you would necessarily do, politics impacts you every single day in every aspect of your life. So it's really important that everybody gets involved and engaged in the process.
Absolutely. So true. So speaking of passion for politics, what sparked yours?
It's actually a little bit of a funny but sad story. I really had no desire to go into politics for my career. I was actually in my final year of college. I was a month out from graduating, and I was going to go into the oil and gas business, take over our family business. We're commercial sandblasters and in the monument business. And I'm in my final month, and we get a phone call that we were losing our small cattle ranch. And so we ended up losing our home due to a big government program that we never signed up for, and we're homeless for several months. And it was that time, being homeless and really starting to understand how this government program left not just me, but my family without a roof over our head. That's really what motivated me to get involved. I ended up talking to a family friend of mine who said, my uncle is running for Congress in Florida, and I think you'd be great. You're not married, you don't have kids. You should drive across the country and, help this guy out who hates government as much as you do. And, you're homeless, you're broke. And so at that point it was just take a huge leap of faith. And I drove across country and ended up working on a campaign, not knowing what I was doing, but just figuring it out along the way. And, at the end of the day, we ended up winning, and I ended up joining the official congressional office and was the deputy chief of staff for the last 8 years. And that's when I met my husband, Matt, who is a firefighter and a SWAT medic. And that's how it all kind of came to be. So never was in the big plan, but it all just kind of fell that way, in that direction. And when my boss decided to retire after 8 years, my husband and our best friend, we sat in a barbecue joint in Gainesville, Florida, and had a heart-to-heart and just really come to Jesus discussion about the state of affairs for our country. And we could have all walked away from politics and said, we've done our time in serving the district and serving the country and the community, and we're going to go off and do, anything we want, build a business, travel, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, and really the end of the conversation in this, it was actually David's barbecue. I'll never forget it. We sat there and looked at each other and said, do you really want to raise babies in a socialist nation? Are you gonna be able to look our kids in the eye years from now and tell them that mom and dad did absolutely everything that we could to protect that opportunity that we had growing up? And we kind of looked around at each other. There were some tears shed, and we just said, no, don't think that we'll be able to do that. And so we jumped all in and ran for Congress, and it was wild.
I can't even imagine, but I think it's people like you who maybe would be considered, at least initially, political outsiders, much like Trump and anyone else, and people who just truly love this country. And it's not that they love politics, but they know that they have to get involved, and the only way you can make change is if you're part of what makes the change happen.
To read the bills, because my family lost everything and homeless because people in Washington did not read the bills. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to vote on something because. So we started digging into the legislation. It was horrific and terrifying. Everything from the stripping of support for our small and mid-sized departments to taking literal equipment off of the backs of our men and women in uniform, the advisory boards tying the accreditation, but you would have to have the NAACP and the ACLU as part of your advisory board. It was from A to Z a terrifying piece of legislation that had nothing to do with improving relations between the law enforcement community and the community that they serve. And it had nothing to do with improving the police, our police departments. It had everything to do with cutting them, gutting them, defunding them. And I don't care how many times people want to stand up and say, that wasn't what we were doing. Yes, it was. I read the bill. And I can't tell you how many people don't read the bills. And so I told my husband, because I fly back and forth from DC to Florida, and I told my husband, I'm gonna have to borrow one of your SWAT vests. And it just kind of hit me. And I said, I'm gonna have to borrow it. And he's all like, okay, do what you got to do. I have no idea how you're going to get it up there. And he has a secondary squat vest in case he had a
Right.
call out. And so I wanted to make sure that, he had
Of
his
course.
stuff, his gear. And by the way, if you have ever tried to get a ballistic vest through TSA, I know in my heart what I want to say. And the process when a bill comes up like that is we get 1 or 2 hours of debate, and it's evenly split between Republicans and Democrats, and you go back and forth. So one side speaks, the other speaks, and you have someone who manages the time for you on each side. And Jim Jordan was managing the time for Republicans, and so I'm like, well, let's see what I can do. And so I'd called Jim and I said, hey, I need 3 minutes, and he's like, I'll give you 1. And I'm like, oh no, I can't give the speech that I want to give.
Right.
And keep in mind, I had been thinking a long time about what I wanted to say, but hadn't put it to paper. And then my team handed me a script, and I said, guys, you wrote a beautiful speech, but this has to come from me. I have to write it in my own words. And so I knocked it out in about 30 minutes and rewrote it, wrote it again, rewrote it, wrote it again, settled on what I was going to say. And it timed out about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And so I grabbed the vest, and it's an old school military surplus vest.
Right.
We don't have a big city that gets fancy gear every year. We have old military surplus equipment because we're a small, we're like a mid-sized town. And so that's what a lot of the departments have to rely on.
Right.
And so I hoof it down there with my speech in hand and the vest on my arm on the other. And I get down to the House floor, and Jim Jordan took one look at me, and he's like, okay, you get 2 minutes. And I remember kind of walking up to the podium where the microphone was. And I remember one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle saying some not nice things as I was like taking my seat. And everyone was looking like, what is this person doing with that vest? And so I was kind of keeping it low. And after that, I honestly, I cannot remember a thing. I think I blacked out. It was an out of body experience, because the next thing I know, I'm grabbing that vest, and I was hoping that the microphones around the table were going to pick up the boom.
Yes.
And I was like, I've got to lift this vest as high as I can and drop it as hard as I can. Of course, I'm 5'3" with little T-Rex arms, so it's like you ain't gonna get that much.
They're heavy, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm thinking I just need to like get that moment where everyone pays attention, because this was to me exceptionally personal. And so if you've seen the video, you see me throw the vest on the table, it booms, and then I go into it. But the point that I was trying to make about not just the bill, but the law enforcement community and what's happened over the last few years, the attacks that we all, and I say we because as well as I do as a spouse, we serve right alongside our spouse. And so I was really trying to make the point that there's a very unique group of people that make up law enforcement communities. They're the ones that miss the holidays because they're working on shift, or they've picked up a shift for a buddy who maybe it's the first Christmas with their kids that they're going to have in 3 years. Maybe it's a birthday party. I know we have picked up shifts for our brothers and sisters who are undergoing cancer treatment. There's a litany of reasons why we miss so many things, but there's things out of our control. And I can't tell you how many times Matt and I have had to wake up in the middle of the night and there's a SWAT call out because of a barricaded subject with small children who's threatening to, harm them or himself. And so the point I was trying to make was, our brothers and sisters in blue have been vilified for years, and no one has pushed back. And the bill that they were trying to pass was going to be the final nail in the coffin to fundamentally change what it meant to be a law enforcement officer, what community policing really meant. And I wanted to really make the point that if people were truly serious about safer communities and improving community relations and better training and really moving forward in a productive way, you don't divest, you invest. And so that was really the point of the whole speech. And thankfully, a lot of media outlets and folks picked it up, and I cannot tell you the outpouring of support I got from police wives and fire wives, and they were like, thank you. And I'm saying
Yes.
thank you. I
Yeah.
just, it is truly a brotherhood, it's a sisterhood, and we have to stick together. And
Yes.
I think that there's going to be more battles to come here in the next few months. And so
Right.
that speech may have been part one.
Mhm.
We're going to fight the whole way through to make sure that we really do protect the men and women who wear the uniform. I just can't think of anything more important than the front lines in our hometowns.
Crime is exploding across America. Defunding the police is causing even more chaos and increased crime in communities we live, work, and raise our families. We need your support to refund the police. Your donations will go toward the development of a national media advertising blitz to rally Americans who are sick and tired of the attacks on law enforcement. So donate today and help refund the police.
All right. So as promised, we have Stephen and Christina here today, and I am so excited to have you guys on the show. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're glad to be here.
Today, I get to chat with you again, one-on-one or one-on-two, I guess, technically, right? And we are, as you know, of course, we're discussing the stigma of mental health in law enforcement. And I'm really just going to kind of hand it over to you, Stephen, to start off with, and you kind of tell us your story and kind of how this all came about, you speaking out about this.
Okay. Well, I'm Steven. This is my wife, Christina. I've been a police officer for 12, 13 years now. But before that, I had some issues early childhood. And I think that's a lot of times why people like us grow up to become police officers, is the issues that we had.
Mhm.
But I had some issues in my childhood that I didn't deal with. I never got any help for the things that I never. I'm learning through therapy what complex trauma is and how it affects you. So for a long time I thought maybe it was just PTSD. Maybe it was something like that. My therapist sat me down and explained what complex trauma was, and I was like, hey, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
With complex trauma, you never have a baseline.
Mm.
So, you're going through life in early childhood and bad things happen. And you go up. And more bad things go up or happen and you go up. Then you join the Marine Corps, which is what I did out of high school. And then you go up a little bit more. And then when you get out of the Marine Corps, you become a police officer. And so the everyday stresses and everything, you go up a little bit more. So what's been explained to me by my therapist is that we have to create a baseline. We have to create where my happy area is.
Okay. Sure.
But what I'm learning now is that there's a time and place to deal with these things.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the middle of a 12-hour shift isn't the time to deal with them.
Right.
But you've got to deal with them
Mm-hmm.
at some point, because if you don't, they'll eat you alive.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
I had a pretty big breaking point. I responded to a infant that wasn't breathing.
Mm.
So we got there, my partner and I did CPR on a 6-month-old baby. Mom had co-slept with the baby on the couch, and in the middle of the night rolled over and suffocated. And she was gone before we got there. But
Okay.
because of the way that Mom had slept with her, she still felt warm.
Wow.
So, and it didn't help that I had how old was Braden at the time? 2 months?
Yeah, 2 or 3 months old.
Yeah. So I had a child very close
Ooh.
in age.
Yeah.
So I would come home every day after shift, and I would look in the crib to make sure he was breathing.
Absolutely. Yep.
And if he wasn't, I'd wake him up
Mm-hmm.
and then go to bed and leave her to deal with it. Not
Yeah, I totally get it.
not husband of the year
No,
behavior.
no, but and I'm sure Christina, you can agree that in hindsight, like understanding the why of what he was doing, didn't make your sleep patterns any better. But boy, understanding in hindsight is pretty incredible, right?
Right.
Sure.
Didn't know how to deal with stress.
Mm-hmm.
Have an issue with anxiety. I wasn't
Mhm.
dealing with that. And I held on for a little while because my father always taught me, you grin and bear it.
Right.
Do what's best for the family.
Mm-hmm.
You come second. And to an
Were you
extent,
able, I'm sorry, were you able to, even at that time, were you able to identify what was going on with you as like the anxiety? Did you recognize it as that, or were you almost like disassociated from the emotional part of what was happening to you?
I was in complete denial. I was in complete denial. So much so that I was in complete denial. I was like, no, not having it. Don't even want to have the conversation. He
Right.
tried to have the conversation with me multiple times. And I was like,
Mhm.
nope, stop. We're not having this conversation.
Yeah. So Christina, you saw things. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You guys have been together for quite a long time, right? You high school?
High
No.
school.
High school. Yeah, I thought so. Okay. So you probably know him better than he knows himself.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And so you obviously saw a transformation. Is that correct?
I did. And it was slow, but it was progressing as we went on. But like it's looking back, we definitely should have seeked more help. And at the time, counseling, therapy, all of that was just it was taboo to us, like
Right.
don't need to admit that we were, struggling. But it definitely would have helped if we had just gotten some guidance. We had tried
Well,
to,
you're both clearly caretakers. Like that is your nature. That's who you are. That's what you do. So you're so busy taking care of everyone else and making sure everyone else is okay. You both were probably emotionally starving, essentially, I would imagine.
it was
Um,
everything to keep our heads above water. And that's
I-
that's all we were doing for that amount of time was just keeping our heads above water.
Yeah, I believe it. So then for you, Stephen, so you mentioned a breaking point. And so how did that affect your career? Because of course we all know that the mindset, the behavior, the mentality is to always be fine, always be okay, always handle everything and not to talk about any emotional problems that you're having because it's just what you do for many, many reasons. So walk us through that next phase, if you will.
So I've always been a very brash person. Wouldn't you agree? But as far as how it affected work, I started to get into more trouble.
Mhm.
I started getting more citizen complaints.
Mhm.
I started getting more attitude complaints. I would, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, I basically just say exactly how I felt to them. There was no buffer there.
What were your feelings at that point, Christina? Were you hitting a point where, I don't know, sometimes I hear like the spouse will say, I was getting to the point where I was ready to give him an ultimatum, either pull it together or we're through, or, I mean, I know enough of you to know that quitting is not an option for you. So how did you handle all of this going on?
So for me, I found myself trying to handle the house on my own
Mhm.
because I knew he was going through stuff in his own head and in his own work and everything. And even though I'm working a full-time job, I found myself to, you know what, I'm just going to handle it. I'll handle it all.
Right.
I'll do all the housework. I'll do all the kids stuff. I'll give them the rest, put them in bed before he gets home. Just, it was two reasons, for to not have to have him come home and deal with it because I knew he was going through enough, but I also knew it was going to spark an argument. It was,
Sure.
okay, well, I've done this, this, and this. What are you going to do now?
Right.
So a lot of times I walked on the eggshells.
Yeah, you played the role of peacekeeper. Just keep the peace, keep everybody quiet, and if not happy, at least not making waves. Now, Stephen, at what point did you decide it was time to get help?
I held on for a couple more years, maybe a year and a half after we got Daniel. There came to a point when I couldn't take it anymore, and I went to her and told her I wanted a separation. And so I ended up moving into an apartment. She stayed here with the kids. I would come here and spend the night on my days off. But basically, what I discovered in hindsight was that I was running from my family. I was running from her. I was running from, because all these issues continued to pile up, and instead of deal with them, we were separated for 4 years. Things continued to get progressively worse for me. Obviously got a lot worse, living on my own, not having my kids around. And I remember just, her and I went to Waffle House, and we sat down and I talked to her, and I told her, I said, hey, look, my therapist says it's time for medication. And her jaw hit the floor.
At the therapist part or at the medication part? Because that was not an option for a long time, right?
So I decided to start seeing a therapist a little bit before that.
Okay.
And that was a jaw dropper for her too.
It was.
She was stunned. I remember that. She's like, you're gonna do what?
Wow. Stephen, I'm sorry, Christina, was that like a moment of hope for you, that you never gave up the faith on him? You never gave up on him. Christina, talk to us, please.
So when he finally started going to counseling, we were about 2.5 years into this. And yes, it was a huge ray of hope for me, because at that point I felt like I was just grasping at every little piece of string that I could. I made sure that we maintained that friendship throughout the separation. Nobody on Facebook knew. Whenever I posted on Facebook, it was, had a great time at the park, and I would always include him in those posts and everything. So nobody, when it finally came about that we were separated, everybody was shocked. And it wasn't until recently, within the past couple of months, that Stephen came out publicly with everything, and people were messaging me, and they were like, "We had no idea." But yeah, it was hard. There were moments where, and I was telling him this the other night, of just laying in bed and just waiting for the kids to fall asleep so that I could process my emotions, and I could cry, and I could get it out. And there was a select friends that I could lean on. But there was also some friends that, didn't understand. They couldn't understand why I was holding on. But I knew his heart, and I just knew this wasn't him. And as long as I kept that friendship, I knew there was a hope. So when he sat me down at the Waffle House and he told me that he was getting on meds, I told him then that, because he came into that conversation thinking that I was going to think less of him. And I told him then, I said, Stephen, as long as you're getting help, and as long as you're doing what your therapist says, you're taking medications, you're working on you, I'm not going anywhere. I've come this far. Why on earth would I back out now? Our kids need you. I need you. So yes, him coming to me and having that conversation with me was just that ray of hope that I needed to just keep pushing forward.
Go enjoy that turkey coma now. Bye, guys.
Come together to share our lives, standing on the thin blue line, giving you some peace of mind. On the Blue Family Unity Show.
If you're part of the law enforcement family, this is your show. Here we talk about all things Leo family life, the good, the bad, the funny, and the sad, and everything in between.